election judge training for the 2020 presidential nomination primary. Today we'll be talking about all things PNP. PNP stands for the Presidential Nomination Primary, so we'll start using that acronym because it's easier to say. We'll talk about the basics of the PNP, how to set up your polling place for it, specifically what has changed for the various election judge roles for the PNP, and then we'll just touch on other new election procedures. Your presenters tonight, I'm Heather Bessler. I'm the Assistant Director of Property Records and Licensing for the county. And co-presenting with me tonight is Anissa Hollingshed with the City of Rochester. She is the City Clerk. And with that, I'll turn it over to Anissa.
And for those of you who were with us for head election judge training, my apologies in advance. We've covered some of this in head election judge training, but it's always good to hear it twice versus 0 times, right? So we also have new folks joining us for the PNP training, so we want to make sure that we go through all of these details with all of you, and we're all prepared for a successful election event on March 3rd. So we are doing the presidential nomination primary this year. This is the first time since 1992 that Minnesota voters will have an opportunity to vote in a presidential primary. This is in response to action by the state legislature in 2016 to establish a primary again for presidential voting. This is only the 5th time in the state's history that we've had a presidential primary, and there have been quite long gaps in between each of those occurrences. So this does not take the place entirely of the caucus, but it supplements the caucus. It does move presidential preference voting from the caucus process to this presidential primary. And so this is a very important thing for us to remember when we're thinking about this election event, is this is a party process to help the major parties that are participating in the PNP select their candidates for president to appear on the ballot in November. And so as we talk about some of the things that are unique about this election event, it's important to remember and to share with voters as well that these differences come from the fact that this is a party process. So for those of you who are familiar with caucuses, typically Minnesota is a caucus state. Certainly we're at a period with a lot of attention around caucuses right now, as our neighbors in Iowa are preparing for their first in the nation caucus next week at this point. And that is typically the way that Minnesota's voters have been able to participate in their party of choices process to identify a presidential candidate. This year, the parties that are participating in the PNP will also be holding caucuses a week prior to the PNP date. So that'll be on Tuesday, March 25th. But at their caucuses, they will be selecting delegates to move on to other conventions, ultimately their national conventions, and as well voting on their party platforms and handling other party business. The presidential preference voting will be moving to this primary process. So what the genesis of this shift was the desire from voters after the last few presidential elections, so really starting in 2008, 2012, 2016, seeing increasing numbers of people interested in participating in the caucus process. And if you're familiar with caucuses, it's something that happens on one day, at one time, in one place. So if you can show up on Tuesday night at 6 p.m. at the local high school or whatever the location is, great, you can caucus. But that means for folks who are accustomed to participating in our regular election events, there's no absentee voting opportunities. There's no, full day, come when it works for you, that kind of thing. It's show up when it is or you're out. And so as participation and interest has increased, there is an increasing desire from some voters to have more accessibility to this process of helping select a presidential candidate for the major parties. So in response, the legislature established this PNP. But again, it's a party process to help these parties identify their candidates moving forward to their November ballots. So in Minnesota, we now have four major political parties. As we've had for many, many years, we have our Democratic Farmer Labor or DFL party, our Republican Party, and then after the 2018 general election, we gained two new major political parties in Minnesota. So that would be the Legal Marijuana Now Party and the Grassroots Legalized Cannabis Party. All four of these major parties had the opportunity to participate in the PNP, and they had to notify the Secretary of State's office by December 31st of their plans to either participate or not. So we now know that two of the four major parties will be participating. So we will have the DFL party and the Republican Party participating. And these parties have agreed to use this primary process to help them identify which candidate will move forward for them in November. So when voters go to vote on March 3rd or early by absentee ballot, they are voting to bind delegates at these parties' national conventions to the candidates that they're voting for on these days. So as we talk about this process, again, this is a change for Minnesota voters because it looks like an election, it feels like an election, but it's a party process being run by election administrators to make it more accessible. So voters will likely have questions. You may have questions, and we want to make sure that you've got resources to help address those questions. So certainly your election judge guide, there is a supplemental PNP election judge guide that's also available that has more information. We'll be sending out FAQs to all of your polling locations. We'll talk tonight about some of the additional signage and information that will be in your precinct to help voters understand and know what's happening in this election event, what they can anticipate, all of those things. So we'll just talk through quickly some of the basic questions that are likely to come up most frequently. So first and foremost, people might want to know, do I have to be a member of the party to vote in this primary? If I choose a party, does that make me a member? Any of those things? And the answer is you don't have to be a party member. Selecting a party to receive their ballot does not make you a member of that party. You are, your choice as a voter does get recorded in your voter record, but it does not connote membership in that party. Voters do not have to vote for the same person in November. They don't have to vote for the same party in November necessarily. The choice that they are making on March 3rd is a choice up to the individual voters, which party they are choosing to identify with and get the ballot for, but that choice only carries weight in terms of which ballot they will receive on March 3rd. We'll talk a little bit more as we talk about how voters check in and the voter oath, what they are basically affirming in selecting a party. Again, it's not making them a member of the party. They're not saying, I belong to this party, I wish to belong to this party, but they are going to need to sign with their voter oath there's an additional bit of language there that you'll see in a later slide, that they are in agreement with the general principles of the party for which they are choosing to vote. Again, doesn't make them a member, but they do have to state a general agreement with that party. Voters may wonder who decides what's on each party's ballot. And again, it's a party process. The party chairs make that determination. So that was something that the participating parties had to provide to the Secretary of State's office by December 31st. And the DFL party has selected to place 15 candidates on their ballot, as well as an uncommitted option for voters to choose from. The Republican Party has placed a single candidate on their ballot, as well as a write-in option. Voters may have questions, well, what if a particular candidate has already dropped out of the race? It does not change the ballot content. So of those 15 DFL candidates, some of those candidates have dropped out of the race at this point. They will still appear on the ballot because those are the candidates that the party certified to the Secretary of State's office. If voters choose to vote for one of those candidates, it will still bind delegates to that candidate, even if they've withdrawn from the race at this point, for at least the initial part of that party's convention. That process is bound by party rules, in terms of how long delegates are bound to a particular candidate and things. So that may differ from party to party. That's a party process. But at least initially, voters' choices are what are binding delegates. So for the DFL ballot, that uncommitted option, that is if a voter chooses to vote so that they're sending delegates to the national convention who are not bound to any of those other 15 candidates on the ballot. And we'll talk more about that in the instructions for voters and how to communicate that to voters as we go through tonight as well. So a really big question that you are likely to hear, that you may have, and that you've probably seen some media around is, can others find out which party I choose? The voter's choice of party is private data. We have to handle that very carefully and ensure that we're respecting the voter's privacy, maintaining the integrity of that private data throughout the voting process and after election day. So as election judges, it's not something you should be discussing with each other. As we talk about procedures, very few election judges within the polling place will even know which ballot a particular voter has chosen, because our procedures are designed to ensure that only the person who has to give the voter the ballot knows which ballot they're giving that voter. And we want to make sure we're protecting that. And so that carries over even when you go home. Don't go home and tell your spouse, hey, guess what? Do you know Gary down the street picked this party's ballot? No, that's private data, and it stays private data even after the election. Now, the caveat to that is that the list of voters and which ballot that they chose will be provided to the chairs of the participating major parties. So that is an authorized use of the private data, just like it's an authorized use for us as election administrators to know the voter's choice in order to give them the correct ballot. The major party chairs are able to get access to that information as well after the primary. So voters should know that and be aware that that information will be shared in that limited manner. If voters have questions about why do I have to choose a party ballot, this comes down to it is a party process to help the parties identify their candidates moving forward. And so we are administering that on behalf of the parties, and the way that the legislature has set that up with the agreement of the national parties for their participation is that they each have their own ballot, and voters have to make that selection of which ballot they will be voting on. So as we talked about, the voter privacy is extremely important. It is not the role of election judges to question a voter's choice of which party they wish to receive the ballot from. And it is essential that we are protecting that. Because this is actually classified under the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act as private data, any revealing of this information outside of what's allowed by law is actually a data breach, and something that we have to follow very specific protocols for around that. So we definitely want to avoid that, because your city clerk does not want to have a data breach incident and the associated work that goes with that. Another part of this, because again, of the classification under the Government Data Practices Act, anytime in government we're collecting private data from people, we have to provide them with what's called a Tennyson warning. And it's named after the state legislator who authored the original legislation putting this in place. And it tells people when we're getting their private data, what we're collecting that's private, who can have access to it, what they'll do with it, and what happens if they don't provide that data. So this is the Tennyson warning, and voters don't have to sign this, they have to be provided it. So it will be posted by all the poll pads in each voting location. And you can see it tells people, you have to select a party choice. This is private information. Election administrators will have access to it to give you your ballot. And the major political party chairs will have access to it for political purposes. If you choose not to give us this information, you won't be able to participate in the presidential primary. Yes, Kathy.
The data in the register, in the poll pad, includes date of birth and address, so it's not just all that goes as on the list, correct?
Yes. So in terms of what goes to the major parties, it's the voter list. And that is something, voters may have questions about that. Voter lists are provided to candidates, campaigns, parties in every election at the request for political purposes. The addition in this election event is that choice of ballot. Um, all right, I'm going to turn it over to Heather to keep us moving.
Moving to how we recommend to specifically set up your polling place for the presidential primary. As Anissa indicated, there are a lot of procedures that we have to implement because of voters having to share that party's choice. And so, one of the changes that we're recommending that you make when setting up your polling place is how the voters queue for checking in and registering at the poll pads. So, if you think about how a bank is set up, a bank has a line of tellers, and the line of customers starts about 3 to 5 feet away from that line of tellers. And that's to maintain customers' privacy when they're interacting with those tellers. We want you to set up your polling place in the same manner. Set up your poll pads in one line, and then you have your voters queue about 3 to 5 feet back from where those poll pads are, so that we are maintaining that voter's privacy. It's just poll pads are can process any voter at any time. Every poll pad can register a voter. Every poll pad can check in a voter. It doesn't matter which poll pad a voter goes to. So you can. That's why we're recommending to have that one central voter queuing line, and the election judges just wave the next voter in line to come to their poll pad to help them check in and/or register. Something to remember if you're at the poll pad working with voters, you aren't going to be expressing out loud what that voter's party choice is, but it's possible it could come up in conversation. And so to remember to use your inside voice when talking to the voters and to provide discretion when talking with the voters, that you're not announcing it or talking loud enough for the voter at the neighboring poll pad to overhear that voter's choice. For the presidential primary, for the election judge responsibilities, election judges are still held to the same code of conduct that you are in any other state election. But because voters are expressing their political party choice in this primary, we have to take extra care and discretion when we are helping them. As Anissa indicated, that party choice is considered private data, and if it's released, it's a data breach, and we have to deal with that in a very specific method, and it's a serious thing. And so we want to make sure that election judges are keeping this information private inside and outside of the polling places. When it comes to party balance for the presidential primary, those rules stay the same. There has to be a minimum of 3 appointed election judges in each polling place. You will by far have more than that in your polling place. At least 2 election judges must represent different major political parties. Remember, we have 4 major political parties in Minnesota now, so judges could represent any of those 4. No more than 1/2 of the judges can be from the same major political party. If you have a student judge in your polling place, they are not able to participate in any of those tasks that require that party balance. Unaffiliated judges are not able to participate in any of those tasks that require that party balance, as they are unaffiliated and aren't affiliating with a party. And then moving to election judge roles, with the greeter judge, you'll find that the greeter judge really plays a vital role during the presidential primary because they're that first line of contact for voters as they come through the door. Voters are going to be directing most of their questions to the greeter judge. We're going to have a lot of signage that we're supplying you so that the greeter judge can talk briefly with that voter and say, if you have more questions, feel free to reference any of the signs that we have posted. So know that we are giving out additional signage. The greeter judge will also greet and assist curbside voters. The election judge should be, every once in a while cruising the parking lot to see if there are any voters present that may need assistance in the form of curbside voting. Or they may be that first line for someone who is with the voter who needs curbside voting, and they come in and let them know. Um, Again, P&P questions are going to be big for the greeter judge. And then make sure that you're directing them to that signage, and if any other questions arise or if issues persist, to feel free to call over the head judge to help answer the questions of that voter. As far as curbside voting goes, there is a slight difference when it comes to curbside voting for the PNP. The certificate of registered voter is a form we have always given you. It's the form you take out to that voter's car for them to fill out, and then you bring it in and you check them into the poll pad, or you would check them in on the roster, and then go get their ballot. On this form, you'll see in the middle of that form now that there's a spot for the voter to indicate their major party choice. These forms were made before it was decided that only 2 of the parties were participating in the primary. So this form has all 4 parties listed. Something a judge who is working with curbside voters will need to make sure they're looking for on this form is that the voter isn't indicating one of the parties that isn't participating in the primary. If the voter does indicate a party that's not participating, then that election judge would, have to say something along the lines of, "I'm sorry, the party that you indicated is not participating in the primary. It's only the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. In order to be eligible to vote in this election, we need you to make the selection for one of these 2 parties that are participating." At that point, the voter can make the change on their form and just have them initial that change so that we know that it was the voter that made that change. Or they may just decide to not participate, and that's fine too. For the roster registration judge, there is a change. So I'll be going through what the poll pad screens look like shortly. But when the voter goes to sign their oath, there's a new line that's part of that oath for this PNP. And that line says, "I am in general agreement with the principles of the party for whose candidate I intend to vote." It's up to the voter if they want to sign this or not, but it's something to make them aware of that there is this new line in the oath. We'll be providing copies of this oath with this new line, so you can post it next to the poll pad and you can show it to the voters before you process them in the poll pad in case they decide that they don't want to proceed forward.
They have to sign it in order to proceed, right?
Yeah, the question was, in order to proceed to vote, do they have to sign the oath? And the answer is yes. They have to sign that oath in order for them to proceed forward to receive a ballot and to vote. Yes.
Does their judge will not interfere or select party choice for the voter unless the voter requests assistance for him?
Yeah. So the question was that it says on the slide that the election judge is not to interfere with the voter making the decision unless they ask for assistance. So the process with the poll pad is that you'll go through the normal process of checking them in, but you'll arrive at a screen that asks the voter to make their party selection. At that screen, you'll swivel the poll pad around so that the voter is looking at that screen, and you'll indicate to the voter that it is now time for them to make their political party choice. The voter will make that choice on the screen and hit submit. The next screen is a confirmation screen. This is the voter's last chance to change their mind. If when they get to the confirmation screen, if they decide to move forward with what they decided, they'll hit confirm and it'll go to a new screen. At that point, the election judge will swivel it back around so the screen is facing the election judge and will proceed with finishing checking in that voter. It's important to note here that once that voter hits submit on that confirmation screen, they cannot change their ballot choice from there on out. So if they chose the Republican ballot and they get to the ballot judge and they get the Republican ballot and they don't see their candidate of choice on there and they say, oh, no, I made the wrong decision, I want the Democratic ballot, it's too late. Statute says that once that decision has been made on that roster in that poll pad, that they cannot change their mind after that. You may have a voter that ultimately decides, I made a mistake and I'm unwilling to vote this ballot that I mistakenly chose. They can leave. You want to make sure that the ballot does not leave with them. And then you want to note that in your incident log because your counts will be off at the end of the day. You'll have one more person checked in on the poll pad, then you will have voted ballots in your tabulator. So you want to make sure that you're noting that in your incident log so that your counts you're able to tie out at the end of the night on your counts. For the roster registration judge, the poll pad screens should be turned away from the public. The only time you swivel it towards the voter is when they're making that party choice. They don't have to declare that out loud. The only time it would be said out loud is if the voter indicates to you that they're unable to make that choice themselves and that they need assistance. At that point, you as the election judge would be able to assist them then with making that choice. But you want to make sure that you are avoiding any perception of steering that voter towards making a certain choice. You just want to be of assistance.
Choose one party or the other, how you gonna assist them in choosing that party?
So the question was, how are you going to assist them in choosing the party? I would recommend that you could possibly even take them away from the poll pad at that point, step away from that line so that that conversation can remain just between the two of you. And I would say the poll pad is asking you to make a decision in choosing a participating party. Your two choices are the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Don't make any perception that you are indicating which party that they should choose. Yep. The question was, did we lose the marijuana parties? The answer is they are still major political parties. They chose not to participate in this presidential primary.
They have a hard time of deciding which party to vote. I mean, you can't tell, well, this one stands for this and this one stands for that, right?
The question was if they're having a hard time choosing between the parties, can we tell them or should we tell them what party stands for what? And the answer is no. You should refrain from doing that. You could indicate to them that they are free to leave, go research, or stand to the side and do research of some sort, or talk to an assistant of some sort if they want someone to come in and help them. But you should refrain from giving any information about any of the parties or candidates. Yes.
Since you can see the sample ballots online,
Good question. The question was, are there going to be sample ballots to show them? And the answer is yes. We are supplying sample ballots to all of the polling places. And so we ask that you post those. We'll be giving two copies of the sample ballots. So one should be posted at standing height, one should be posted at sitting height. And we'll give you sample ballots of both parties so that voters could reference those before they get into the line to check in.
There's only gonna be two, how many ballots can you make, 4 or 2?
There will be two ballots. There's the Republican ballot and the Democratic ballot because the other two major parties decided to not participate. Correct. Only two ballots will be available. Uh, Moving forward with this for the roster registration judge, the poll pad receipt will print that person's ballot choice. And because it's printing that, we need to make sure that we are keeping that private. So when the voter signs that oath and hands it back to you, we would like you to place that receipt upside down on that spindle so that the voter coming up behind them won't be able to read what's on that receipt and know what party that person chose. It's the same thing with the ballot judge. That ballot receipt has that party choice on it. And so when they hand that receipt to the ballot judge, that ballot judge needs to take care to flip that receipt upside down when they're putting it on the spindle to maintain that voter privacy.
So just to clarify, we won't have the pad of ballot receipts, they'll be printed out from the poll pad.
The question was, in previous elections, you've received pads of ballot receipts, and you won't have those anymore. We'll give you one pad as a backup in case we lose power and we can't use the poll pads. But you should not be using those if your poll pads are up and running. The poll pad will print out a ballot receipt for registered and and people who you are registering on the day of. So there will be a ballot receipt printed out of the poll pad for every voter that you process.
But just to clarify, there's one that stays with the roster registration table, and then there's a second one that we give to the voter that they take to the ballot table.
With the receipts, the poll pad will print out, it depends the scenario with that voter. If it's a registered voter that you're just checking in, you'll get two receipts that print out of the poll pad. The first receipt will have the oath on it that they need to sign. So you'll hand that to the voter, they'll sign it, they'll hand it back to you. The second receipt that will print out is the ballot receipt. You'll hand that to the voter and they'll walk it over to that ballot judge. If you registered the voter that day on election day, there will be three receipts that print out. There'll be the registration receipt that has the information that would typically be on that registration application that they'll need to sign. There's the second receipt that has the voter oath on it that they will also need to sign. Those two receipts should be handed back to the poll pad judge once they're signed. And then that third receipt is the ballot receipt that you will hand to that voter and they will take with them to the ballot judge station. After the registration check-in station comes the demonstration station. This year we're sending out demonstration ballots. Those are ballots that are not partisan specific. It doesn't say a party on it. It doesn't list any candidates. It just says candidate. It'll show what the write-in option would look like, and it'll show what the uncommitted option will look like. We're supplying those so that election judges can indicate to voters, this is how you complete a ballot without giving any perception of how they should vote, and it can't be construed that you are indicating to them how they should vote. The ballot judge, a lot of this I've already talked about. We need to make sure those receipts are being flipped upside down on that spindle. All precincts will have multiple ballot styles, so you'll have the Republican ballot style and the Democrat ballot style. If you are lucky and you're in a polling place with multiple precincts, you'll have multiple ballot styles. So if you have 2 precincts assigned to your polling place, you'll have 4 ballot styles. You'll have a Republican ballot style and a Democratic ballot style for Precinct A, and you'll have a Republican ballot and a Democratic ballot for Precinct B. So you want to make sure as the ballot judge that you are cognizant of how many ballot styles you have and that voters are getting the correct ballot style. You also want to keep in mind how many ballots you have on hand. If your ballot supply gets down to like a 1 pack, you want to make sure you're calling our office to get replenish that ballot supply.
We're gonna have, I know the school board
The question was, if you have multiple precincts assigned to your polling place, how is that going to look? And it'll look that the poll pads are there's one. All poll pads will have the roster for both precincts, so any voter can go to any poll pad that's at that polling place. Then the voter will move to a joint demonstration station. And then from there, they'll flow to the ballot stations. There will be 2 separate ballot stations, one for precinct A, one for precinct B. That's to help ensure that a voter is getting the correct ballot style. Then they'll flow to the voting area, which is just one voting area. And then finally, the tabulator. There will be 2 separate tabulators, or there'll be one tabulator for each precinct that's assigned to your polling place. That also helps ensure that the voter received the correct ballot style. Yeah. As the ballot judge, make sure that you are handing the voter their ballot in a secrecy folder. In the past, we've not been very adamant that you use these, but we are now. We want you to use these, and we are giving out a large supply to each polling place because it's important that that ballot choice remain private. The Democratic ballot has 15 candidates on it. The Republican ballot has 1. You can tell the difference between the 2 ballots from across the room. That's why it's really important that you're handing the voter that ballot in that secrecy cover so someone across the room can't tell which ballot that they're receiving.
Got the,
Yeah, when you'll hand the ballot to the voter in the secrecy cover, they'll vote their ballot, put it back in the secrecy cover maybe, walk it over to the tabulator, feed their ballot in. The secrecy cover will be collected by the tabulator judge, and then after a while, they'll walk that supply back over to the ballot judge. Yep. If a voter comes up to you and they want to spoil their ballot, again, that's perfectly acceptable. You can do that, but you need to make sure that they receive the the clean ballot that they receive is for the same party that they originally chose. They cannot change parties at that point. The ballot tabulator judge needs to make sure that they're taking care to not reveal how a voter voted or what party's ballot they chose. They'll collect those secrecy covers after a voter's done and return them back to the ballot judge. The head judge, their role is much the same as it always has been, but it's likely that they'll have to handle a few more voter questions because of the nature of this primary. Yes.
Going back to if you're in a location that has 2 precincts, got 2 tabulators. If a person were to accidentally go to the wrong tabulator machine, will the machine recognize someone speeding a ballot?
Excellent question. If you're in a combined precinct with 2 tabulators, um, you you'll see that that a tabulator will only read the ballots for one of the precincts. So tabulator A will read the ballots for precinct A, tabulator B reads the ballots for precinct B. They will not read each other's ballots, and that's done on purpose to make sure that's a triple check to make sure that that voter received the correct ballot style. Yeah. For the poll pad procedures, I've already talked with you about this, but I'll walk through it yet again. The first thing you'll do is search for that voter, just like how you're used to. You'll confirm, you'll find the voter in that search screen, like what I'm showing there, and then you'll confirm that the voter in front of you is the voter you have pulled up. We recommend that you don't recite the address to the voter, that you have the voter recite their address to you so you can verify that that's the voter that's in front of you. Remember, Minnesota is a no-show ID state, so if they're a registered voter, they don't have to show ID. And then even if they are registering, there are some options where they don't have to show an ID. So make sure you're cognizant of that and you're not asking for it when you don't need to. All these screens haven't changed. This is a sample of the basic receipts that you'll see. The first one is if someone registered, that's the receipt that has their registration information on it. That second receipt there is where, like, if they had a voucher, it would show the voucher signature, and then that's where the voter would be signing. So this is where we get to the new steps for the presidential primary. You'll be at this check-in screen where you've pulled up the voter's record. And then the next screen will show the party choices. This is the screen where you swivel it around to face the voter, and the voter makes the decision of the party choice. Once they've indicated their decision on the screen, they will hit that blue accept button up in the corner. It'll go to this screen, which is a confirmation screen. You'll ask the voter to confirm all the information, including their party choice. And if all that looks correct, the voter will hit that submit button up in the corner. The next thing that you'll see is it'll go to a screen saying it's processing the voter. You'll swivel the screen back around to the election judge. This is a sample of what the receipts are going to look like. So on your left, there's the ballot style receipt that shows that person chose Republican in their ward and precinct. And then the receipt on the right is the one with the voter oath that has that additional one line at the very end about the party choice. And that also has that ballot selection of party choice on there. And with that, I will hand it over to Anissa.
So let's talk about challengers and specifically appointed challengers. So appointed challengers are authorized to be in a polling location. For the presidential nomination primary, the major political parties have the opportunity to appoint challengers. A single challenger may be appointed per polling location per party. The role of a challenger in a Minnesota voting location is very limited. We do not have poll watchers in Minnesota. They are not there to generally observe what's going on. The role of an appointed challenger is limited only to having the ability to challenge the eligibility of a voter based upon that challenger's personal knowledge of the voter's lack of eligibility. So it cannot be something where the appointed challenger says, I'm suspicious about that person over there, or something to that effect. They have to have direct personal knowledge that the voter is not eligible to vote. The challenger cannot challenge a voter's choice of party. And a challenger should not know what a voter's choice of party is in order to try to challenge it. So if you have an appointed challenger in your polling location, when they arrive, you want to send them to your head judge. They should have a letter of an appointment from the party that they are serving on behalf of, and the head judge will review that to ensure that they are authorized to be there. And at that point, the head judge will position them in the voting location somewhere near to where voters are coming in and checking in at that poll pad table. But again, not so near to that poll pad table that they are in danger of violating the voter's privacy. What the challenger can do if the challenger wishes to issue a challenge, they must do that directly to an election judge. Appointed challengers should not be interacting directly with voters at all. So we want to make sure that, yes. Yes. So the question is, what do we do if a challenger breaks the rules? Yes, call headquarters. Put it in your incident log. Let them know that, hey, under state statute, your authority or your role within a polling place is limited to this function. And anything that you're doing in your polling place needs to be directed to the judge, ideally the head judge. Do not interact with voters, explaining those expectations. And if an appointed challenger is violating those expectations, making them aware of that and letting headquarters know that right away as well. As we talk about other things that we may encounter on election day, voters are likely to have some questions, as we talked about. If that rises to the level of complaint, hopefully we're able to address those questions. We've talked about some of the resources that you have in your polling place. Certainly your head judge, your election judge guide, and your PNP supplemental election judge guide, the FAQs that we will send out, the signage and additional information that way in your polling location. So for team judges, if you're encountering and working with a voter who continues to have questions, go ahead and escalate that to your head judge. If a voter refuses to make a party choice, they are not going to be able to participate in the PNP. And so that's something that ultimately the head judge will have to reinforce with the voter. And if they still continue to refuse to make a choice of a ballot to receive, the head judge will need to ask them to leave the polling location. Of course, if there are any concerns or issues with that, contact headquarters right away and document everything in your incident log. If voters want to file a complaint at all about anything during the election, as with any election, we send out complaint forms. Be mindful that you have two different styles of complaint forms. So you're going to have your HAVA complaint form, Help America Vote Act, for federal election law violations. So those are things primarily related to accessibility in your polling place, things covered under federal law. Anything that's related to state election law is going to use the very appropriately named state election law complaint form. And so that would be if voters have any issues with laws relating specifically to the PNP, that's all state election law. So that is the complaint form that you can offer to voters that way. We'll talk through some final procedures here.
One of the new things that you'll notice for this election is that the role of the purple binder has changed. Now, are any of you new election judges? No. Okay. So you all have seen the purple binder before. The purple binder used to function as for the storage of all the forms, all of the guides, all of the checklists, etc. We've changed the role of the purple binder. From now on, that purple binder is just going to house documentation. It has a lot of really cool documentation in it. My team has been working really hard on creating new documentation. We've created checklists for opening and closing of the polls that will walk you through literally every step that you have to take in the morning and at night. It tells you have to put the flag out. It tells you have to unlock the door. Everything that you have to do is in these checklists. So you could pull them out of your purple binder and follow those at the beginning or at the end of the night. That purple binder is also going to have picture guides on how to use all of the equipment. It'll include a really detailed poll pad guide that we have changed since the special election. We got a lot of good feedback on that. And so we've added more information to that poll pad guide that will also be in your purple binder. Now, the purple binder no longer has the forms in it. So those forms have been moved to what we're calling Envelope A. Envelope A will have all the forms that you'll need on election day. So you'll find your election judge oaths there, your incident log, your vouching log, your summary statements, your certification forms, everything that you may need to fill out during election day will be in Envelope A.
You want us to put that in A, B, and C.
I'm getting there. In Envelope A, you'll find all your forms there, and you'll put all your forms back into Envelope A after you've completed them. You'll also find two more envelopes, Envelopes B and Envelope C. In Envelope B and C, you will find a blank copy of the summary statement. At the end of the night, we are now asking you to complete 3 copies of the summary statement. Though that summary statement, you'll complete 1 copy and then just transfer the information to the 2 other copies. So for each copy of that summary statement, we need you to attach one of the tapes that print out of your DS200. Your DS200 tabulator automatically prints 3 copies of the summary statement, the closing statement at the end of the night. You'll cut those apart and you'll attach 1 copy to each summary statement. Your pull pad also prints out a summary statement. We ask you to print 3 copies of that pull pad summary statement and attach 1 copy to each copy of the summary statement. We do this because after an election, we have something called canvassing, and statute asks that each canvassing board is given an official copy of the summary statement, and that official copy is supposed to be created on election day. And so that's why we're asking you to complete 3 copies so that we can follow that requirement more to the T now. So you'll put a copy of the summary statement in each tape in envelope B, in envelope C, and envelope A, and then everything will just go back into envelope A, and you'll be done. I'll repeat that. So envelope A will have all your forms in it. Everything you need for that night. It'll also have envelopes B and C inside of it. You'll take envelopes B and C out of envelope A. You'll complete the summary statement that's in each envelope, and you'll just return them back to envelope A. We did this to help hopefully streamline the process at the end of the night. It's a long night, it's a long day. You guys have been there for a long time. The last thing you want to do is stand around and wait at headquarters to get your stuff processed. So hopefully this speeds that process up because we'll only have to reference envelope A. And as long as you put everything back in that envelope A, we don't have to dig around elsewhere and hold the process up. So that's the new process. Feel free to ask questions if you have any about that offline. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Anissa for our last slide. Oh, yes.
Are these, the summary, that will be handwritten? So is it gonna be possible to just copy that with a copy?
That's a great question. The question was, so the summary statement that's in envelope A, you'll be handwriting that. Is it possible to just make a copy of that? And the answer is no, unfortunately. You need to hand transfer that information over to the other 2 copies of that summary statement. It has to be official copies of the summary statement that are completed at election night. So, and not all polling places will have a copier available. So that's why we would like you just to hand transfer that information.
And then there'll be the poll pads go with it, summary statement going with it, right?
Yes, correct. The question was the poll pad summary statement. It does get attached to each because you'll print 3 of those. Yep, each copy, 1 copy of the summary statement, 1 copy of the tape will get attached to each copy of the summary statement. Yes. Yes.
Or can 3 different people write copies then? So they can kind of do it together?
Yeah, the question was, could you have 3 different judges working on it, 1 completing each copy of the summary statement? Yes, you could do that. You just want to make sure that they say the same thing.
All right, so bringing us home for the home stretch here. Some Rochester-specific information here. As in 2018, there will be a single timesheet that goes out to each precinct. It will be pre-filled with the judges and the shifts that they are working as they're assigned to your polling location. There will be space to add additional judges if need be. You want to make sure that all of your team judges sign before leaving for the day, or for all of you, you want to make sure that you've signed that timesheet. If you are working as a team judge, please do not leave for the night until your head judge says you can leave, because all of that closing paperwork and reconciliation needs to be done, and there are multiple things that our team judges need to sign off on and get completed. So please stick around until your head judge releases you and gets everything wrapped up. And your timesheets for Rochester will go back in your envelope A with your other forms at the end of the night that your head judges are bringing back to headquarters. So any questions on that process?
You're just
Okay.
talking Rochester, right?
This is Rochester in terms of the timesheets, yes.
I had a question about.
Okay.
You want it now or later?
Catch me offline.
All right.
All right. Any other questions before we wrap up?
The
Karen?
timesheets, I know last year we had like individual ones where for all the judges, we're not gonna have those individual timesheets.
You did not have that in 2018. You might have had it in 2019 with the school
Yeah,
district,
the school district.
but the city uses a single timesheet per precinct. So,
Is that gonna have like this training on here and stuff on there too, or are you guys just gonna know that?
no, the training's being done separately. So, yep. Yeah, on your timesheet, you are reflecting what was worked on election day. So, any other questions about anything we've talked about tonight? All right. It's always a good motivator to know that's what's standing between you and the door, right? Thank you all very much for coming out and have a wonderful evening.